Hello. Hello, everyone. Joyce here. I'm joined by Q. And this week we'll keep going. We'll keep showing you Q. Actually, we'll keep showing you the website he built for the Growth Awards, the French Growth Awards. They were held on Tuesday night, so he might tell you a bit about that as well. And whereas last week we spent a lot of time on the Supabase side of things, this week we will spend more time on the WeWeb side of things. And also, we had a big release this week on Wednesday, I think. So if you have any questions on the new features, we can answer those as well, and walk you through some of the new features, maybe later in the stream. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Maybe we can wait a little bit for people to join, or you can jump right in as you wish.
I mean, I can begin by showing the website actually, because yeah, the event was this week, so it's not over. But I wanted to keep the app to show you, or like to finish the use case basically. So let me share my screen, screen 2, yeah, and get my cursor so you can see my click. So yeah, this was the website. So the event was all about like giving awards for head of growth, viral strategies, growth strategies, all these kind of things. So to do this, people could nominate other companies or people, and also for some companies like the growth tool, they could vote. So here you see the voting system, and basically it's an upvote system like Reddit or Product Hunt. And each user has to be logged in, can vote for only one tool once, it's obvious, I mean, but also for like 3 tools max. And I wanted to replicate this to the head of growth category. So by adding upvotes also here, so it's not in production, it's in the WeWeb dashboard, and showing to you how we can like restrict the number of votes per people to 3 also. So what we've done last time is that, if you remember well, in Supabase, let me zoom a little, we created this user best head of growth table, so referencing a head of growth ID and a user ID. So this will start the votes basically. And we created a view using SQL to get the head of growth along with the number of votes they have, for example, here, so that we can use them in WeWeb here. But
And so that was a bit complex. There was a bit of SQL. So if you wanna, you have the recording on our YouTube channel. If you wanna take your time to actually look at that, Q explained everything uh, regarding the join table, regarding how to create a view using SQL. So that's on the in the replays basically on YouTube.
yeah, using low code basically. But we'll continue using some kind of low code, but it will be easier normally today. So the first thing I wanted to do is to protect. No, you know what? Let's do the logic so that users can upvote. So basically, on the upvote button, I will create a workflow here to react on click. So yeah, let's just let it as on click. And let's call this workflow vote, because people, they will. Sorry?
Can you zoom in a little?
Yep. Is it better? Otherwise it will be like huge on my screen, so
Okay.
I don't know. Ah, no, it's only 110. Oh, weird. Okay. It's still 110. Ah, because I'm zooming in the Canva. Yeah, true. So that's no issue. Nice. So on click, the thing we want to do is that we want to first check if the user is logged in, otherwise we'll redirect him or her to the login page. And if he or she is logged in, make them vote basically if they didn't vote for the head of growth already, or don't vote if they voted for the head of growth already. So kind of mimicking the like unlike button on I mean Reddit, but every social media does this. Like when you like a video on YouTube or a post on Facebook, if you click again, you will remove your like, basically. So first thing we have to do is do a true-false split and check, call it is user authenticated. And here we'll bind the condition to the user panel is authenticated. So basically this variable exists in all the auth plugin in WeWeb, and it will be true if the current user is logged in inside the app, false otherwise. So if the user is not logged in, we'll redirect to the logging page. So here, login. And by the way, let me log in, verify that it works, and log in for this example. So I'm not logged in, I'm being redirected to the logging page. I'm logging in with Google that we set up through Supabase. I'm being redirected to the home page, and I will go back to the head of growth page. So now I want to add the upvote system.
Sorry, so now if you go back
Yeah.
to the is user authenticated, no, in the workflow, if you go back
Yeah.
to the first step, now it says true. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, because my user is basically here existing, and the is authenticated variable is true. You could also check if user is not null, but yeah, it's better to take this variable, it's easier. Another mechanism to do an upvote is pretty simple. Basically, voting for someone is creating a record in this table in the user best head of growth votes, and done voting is removing a record in this table. So what we'll do is in simple insert deletes that could be translated if you're using other backend or REST API. It's a simple post and delete action using a REST API.
Hey, Sham. Bonjour.
Hey.
And if you just joined, we're looking at the same Growth Awards website, but looking more on the WeWeb side of things, and whereas last week we're focused on Supabase. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them, including if you have questions on the new features we released on Wednesday. We can look at those later in the stream if you like.
Yep. But first, before to do this, we are lacking something, because right now there's no way WeWeb can know if the user voted for head of growth already or not. So to do this, we'll have to add the votes for a specific user. So basically this table, we'll have to import it as a collection in WeWeb, but we want to scope it for the current user because we don't want the users to get access to all the votes. So what we'll do is that we'll still use row level security inside Supabase to make sure this table is secure, and use a simple rule, a first rule. So I will enable the row level security, and I will add a new policy. So a policy is a way to secure your database so that like the API is really, secure in a sense that people, they can't get or change the data that they're not supposed to, because I really like to remember people that it's not because you're securing a front end like in WeWeb that people cannot change your data in the back end, because they can find your API endpoint, for example. They can like go in the dev tools in the browser, see what's the API doing, and then they will fake API calls and get into your database and modify everything. So you also have, every time if you want to secure project, you have to secure it also on the back end, and that's what we are doing here.
Basically, like what you're saying is, even though the workflow is secure, because the workflow has that condition, users could still tap into the backend through other means.
Yeah, exactly. Normally it's SQL, it's also SQL rules, but what's good with Supabase is that we have some template that we can copy and use, and the one we'll use is basically really easy to do with their templates, because you see they have a simple enable delete access for user based on their user ID. Will do exactly the same except for the read access. So that meaning a user will get only info that is linked to him or her, based on his user ID, because remember, we store also the user ID inside this table. So we're able to tell Supabase, give me only the records in this table where the user ID in the records is the same as the user that's currently connected. So I will use this template, change this to user ID because that's the name of my column in my table. And so here it's telling that the of.uid is a function given by Supabase telling the current logged in user ID has to be equal to the column user ID in my table. Then I will use the operation select because here select is a read. It's the equivalent of the read in SQL. Like when you select stuff, it's that you want to read data. And I will call it enable read for user based on their user ID. Save policy. And now I will add a collection inside WeWeb. So I will call it user best head of growth. Yes, that's quite long. Votes. I will put this into the votes folder.
At least it's explicit.
Yeah, it's explicit. I prefer this, but yeah, sometimes it's really long to type. Using Supabase, and I will query my table. So user best head of growth votes. Take all the fields. And you see in my database, if I go in the here, I have four records, yeah, 4 rows. But one isn't my user ID, so it's another user. And what's cool is because of the security rule we have in Supabase, you see that I only have the 3 records for my current user. So it's impossible for someone to get the other records given their current user ID. So I don't even have to filter here by user ID, even if we've done this last time. All the query you see here, especially for Supabase, is done on the backend. So also if you had the condition like user ID is the current user ID, it's also like really secure because the API call is asking for this specific user, but still a user, if he or she managed to find another user ID, would be able to query for it. Whereas here, if I put the rule on Supabase, it's impossible to do this. So it's still better to do this on Supabase directly. And now if I fetch data, technically, I have all the votes my user has done. It will be the same for all the logged in user. So what I will be able to do now is to compare the votes the user already made to the head of growth he or she is voting for on the page, telling if the head of growth is already in the list of votes, then consider it a done vote because he already voted for this specific person. If the head of growth is not, then it's a real vote, so we'll create a new vote. And so to do this, I will add, so here fake action that I won't use, but just to here to have like true-false split. And on this true-false, what I'll do is I will check if the user already voted for the current head of growth. So what name can I give to be explicit? User already voted for this head of growth. And then the condition here won't be easy, but trust me, you'll understand what I will do. But we'll do basically a formula that will compare 2 lists and check if like the ID of the current head of growth. So because this is the head of growth we clicked on, we have got his ID, and checking if the ID is also in the collection of votes. Because remember here we've got the user ID, but also the head of growth ID. So to do this, I will do a filter by key on the user best head of growth votes data.
Maybe you
Telling
can
how,
hover over the filter by key to show
yeah.
how it works.
So basically it takes an array, so a list, and inside it, it will try to find a value based on the key you will give, because it's really useful when you've got like a collection is basically an array of objects. So objects, it's key value pairs. So what filter by key will do is that it will loop over each element in the array, and inside each element, who's an object, it will find the key, and if the value for this key is equivalent to the one you will give in the formula, it will take back this object. Otherwise, it will filter out the other objects. So basically, it's a way to filter an array by a value. And what we'll do is that we'll filter it by the current head of growth ID. And if the final array that we'll have contains something, that means that the current user already voted for this head of growth. So then the key for the collection is, let me check, head of growth ID. ID.
So this is similar to like formulas you might use in Excel or Google Sheets, for example.
Yeah.
And so the key is case sensitive and needs to be really exact. If there's a space after at the end or in the middle, whatever it needs to be in there. In this case, we're using camel case, so it's slightly easier, but it's yeah,
Yeah.
filter by key formula is something you can find in other tools as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's kind of equivalent of a VLOOKUP in Excel.
Yeah,
Like you're
similar to
looping
VLOOKUP.
over a table and you're finding if your key, the value is the same, then you'll get back the whole value for the record, And because here I already have a vote, you see that I have one object. Otherwise, if I didn't, like if the user hadn't voted for the head of growth already, the list would be empty because basically it wouldn't match anything. So what we could do to know if the user voted already for someone is to check the length, because basically if he or she voted already for this person, the length would be of 1, otherwise it would be of 0. And then we could like do an if on this and get back a true false value to do our split here. So let me show you this with the length. So if I take the length, here you see it's 1 because I have 1 vote. So I could say like it's above 0 or not. And to be more explicit, I will use a if, even if I could do this, because in JavaScript, this would just like return true or false. But basically, if the length is above 0, he already voted for this person, otherwise no. And so we have like our condition.
It's something I'm not sure everyone is aware of, but you see here we're actually in no code formula mode, but we could actually switch to JavaScript. And if we did, you might want to copy before you show.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we do that, then suddenly you're in JS, and the objects that you can see how we name the objects on the WeWeb side of things, but you can actually write JavaScript and work with no code, a mixture of our no code formulas and JS. If at some point if you're a developer, if you code and at some point you're stuck or we don't have the no code formula, for example, the flatten array, we didn't have it for a while. Now we do, I believe, but you can revert to JS anytime you want if you need to.
You could rewrite this also in using only JavaScript, doing like a for loop over like your collection and checking in the value in every object. So, but behind the scenes of formulas, it's only JavaScript functions. So yeah, but let's keep it in formula. So now, if the user already voted for this head of growth, I want to do a down vote. Otherwise, I want to do an upvote. So Downvoting is quite easy. Basically, it's a delete on my user best head of growth votes table, and then I will have to give the user ID and the head of growth ID so that Supabase will be able to say, okay, I have to remove, like, delete this record. So the user ID is quite simple. It's the current user ID. And the head of growth ID is the ID of the head of growth that was clicked on. So it's the current item ID. I can try it. For example, I think it's this record that will be deleted. Cannot read properties of undefined. Why? User best head of growth votes. Yep. Because I've got RLS policies enabled, so I have to finish my policies. Otherwise, Supabase will be like, hey, you don't have right to do this. So I will have to finish my policies before.
So right now you're only allowed to read, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, yeah, you can't delete because there's no rule around that. So by default, it's forbidden. And actually, that's a really nice thing for a tool to do, because you would prefer this. Like, some no-coders, they are afraid of this because it's harder to build, but actually it's way more secure, because every use case you wouldn't have, like, you forgot to think of, it will be protected by default. So it's better to do this like that way, like restrict the access and give access to some people on a basis, rather than opening everything and then trying to think to all the ways someone can hack you. So the first thing we want to do is add a new policy that's actually exactly this template. We want to enable the delete for people based on their user ID. So they will be able to only delete votes that were that they gave, basically, and not be able to delete votes from other users. So we'll use this template. Again, here it's user ID. So delete and enable delete for user based on their user ID. Review, save policy. And the last thing I want to do, I want to enable all the users, if they're currently authenticated, to add a record, so basically to vote. So I will have to add this rule as well. So to do this, enable insert for authenticated users only. That's also something that's in the template. So you see insert, then here we target some roles. So here it's all the authenticated users, but you could also like add roles on some use cases for, like, for example, allowing only insert for admins, for example, or, like, kind of handling the different authorization in your app. Here we don't care. As long as the user is authenticated, it's true. Then I save my policies. I go back in my base. And now if I try, it worked. So if I refresh my database, you see that the record disappeared. So that was a done vote. Now I want to handle the upvote. So it's an insert, still on the same table. Oh, weird. Let me add this. Insert, upvote. User best head of growth, votes. Yeah, that's it. I think it was a small bug because I tried to do an insert on my view, and you can't insert on views because views are computed when you ask for them. And that's something we'll add in the roadmap, maybe not showcasing the views in the inserts. But anyway, that's no biggie. So here I don't want to add the created at because it's auto-generated, so only user ID and head of growth ID, and it's the same as before. The user ID is here. The head of growth ID is here. And if I try it, it worked. And if I refresh, you see that my vote came back. So apparently it's working. Then I still have two things to do, is to fetch collections for the current votes for the current user, so that WeWeb knows that the user voted or don't voted for someone, and also the head of growth views, so the collection we have, so that WeWeb is able to like change the number of votes in real time in the front end, like like the display with the upvotes, with the number of votes, it gets updated too. So to do this, I will do fetch collection on the user best head of growth votes, if I remember well. Yep. And also another fetch collection on best head of growth.
That's at collection level, we refetch the info basically so that it's up to date.
Yeah. Can show this to you, like if I vote for this person. Also, it was a don't vote because I already voted for him. But basically, if I vote for her, it gets updated. Also, it's changing because we sort on the number of votes. So it's changing dynamically. But I can vote like for as many people as I want. And normally it gets updated. Why doesn't it get updated? That's the point I wanted to make, but I forgot that I already implemented it on my Supabase table. But I want to restrict the number of votes to 3 votes per user. And to do this, there's no way to do this with a row-level security. You have to do like what we call functions in SQL and triggers. And triggers basically, they trigger a function every time you try to do it could be an insert, a select, a delete, on a table, everything you want. It's a way to also like check for complex rules when you're like trying to change your database. So to do this, I created this function, and every time this function is triggered, what it does is that it checks the number of votes in the user best set of growth votes table for the current user ID. And if it's already above 2, meaning it's there's 3 votes, it will raise an exception. Otherwise, it won't do anything. So meaning if the user already voted for 3 person before the insert, it will trigger an exception, meaning no, you can't vote for like in this category anymore. Otherwise, it will let the request pass. And to do this, so you create this function, and then you have to create a trigger that will use this function. You have to give it a name. Say that you will do for each row, you will execute the function. And here we tell the database using SQL to do this before every insert. So every time someone is trying to vote, execute the function. And then if it's passing, let the user upvote. So meaning that here, I can even show you this, I think, in the WeWeb debugger. If I would try to upvote for someone, you see that here I would get an error. No more upvotes for this user because I already have 3 votes. So what we want to do...
Actually, can you show it in the... Because you were going to show it in the inspector of the navigator as well, right?
Yeah. We can
you show it as well?
check
Because I think a lot of our users don't necessarily know the inspector very well, and it's kind of nice to learn.
Yeah. So if you go into network, so this is in French, but basically normally it's network in English. You will see all the API calls that are done in real time. So here you see that we have some. And when you try to do an upvote or a downvote on Supabase, we are doing, like the WeWeb app is doing an API call to Supabase. And here you see that we're getting a 400, meaning that it failed. And in the message, you've got this no more upvote for this user, because that's what the exception we set in the SQL function. Otherwise, if I were to do...
I think it's I think the tab is
Yeah.
called Preview, and you see
Ouais,
Q is
preview, yeah.
using Microsoft Edge, but it's the same in Chrome, and it's similar in Mozilla as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Edge is using Chromium under the hood, so like the
yeah,
DevTools is exactly the same for Chrome,
yeah.
if you were to use it. But yeah, in Firefox, it's almost the same. And if I were to do a downvote, you see that here I have an API call that's actually working. It's a 200 delete. And in the preview, I have like the record that I just deleted. And if I were to upvote for someone, again, it would pass because now I have 3 votes. And then again, a fourth one, it will be 400. You don't have, like, you have no rights to do this. And some
So when
people I know in
Q,
no code. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
no, sorry, I was gonna say when you said earlier that, people can see the API call and potentially work out, user IDs, for example, if you're using 1, 2, 3, 4, if you're using sequential IDs or emails or whatever, that's what you were talking about, right? That you can go in the
Yeah.
inspector and actually look at the path, the URL path of the API call and see what parameters are being sent
Yeah,
to the
exactly.
API.
Here you see the request to Supabase, and you see that we've got some query string parameters with columns, user IDs, also like the headers with the API keys. So actually, every website is like this. It's not something that WeWeb is doing differently. I mean, every website you're using in the world is doing this. And that's the way people have done this in the past, but are able to like reverse engineer your API and your backend, and you're able to fake calls as if you were the front end, so like the app, but without the limitations of clicking on buttons. So basically, you would say, I see that here I have to send a user ID, so I will try another user ID. And basically, if it passes, the API is like, it's thinking it's a right, the request is right. That's why you have also to secure the backend so that the backend is able to say, no, I don't want this request to pass.
And that's why as well we recommend using UUIDs and Supabase, for example, instead
Yeah,
of, if you're using Airtable as a database, for example, it's kind of tricky because you don't have UUIDs. You might use user emails instead of UIDs, and then user emails are very easy to guess. So all these
yeah.
little kind of things that we mentioned during the live streams, that's why we mention them.
Yeah, yeah, especially because like all of the databases by default they use integers, so like 1, 2, 3, and the easiest thing to do is to do +1 and try to get all the records. So yeah, use UUIDs if you can because they are random. So yeah, and the last thing I wanted to say is that lots of no coders, when they see API that fail, they are kind of afraid. Whereas here it's exactly best practice to do this, and we'll tell WeWeb to react on errors to display a pop-up message. But that's a normal thing to do, and you shouldn't be afraid that your backend is telling you no, you can't, because that's actually the behavior we want. And you don't want to get back a 200 with an error message. You really want to, like, the best practice is to get back a 400 or like a 403 telling like you don't have the rights to do this. And then in WeWeb, we'll use the on error in the workflow to react to this and display an error message. So yeah, going back into WeWeb, normally I added a modal already. Okay, let me go up. That I can trigger. So first display in editor. You see here, it's in French, but it's written, you can vote only for 3 people max. And if you click here, it will like remove the pop-up. And this pop-up display is bound to the display 3 vote max toast variable that false by default. And basically what we'll do in the workflow is on error, we'll toggle, like switch this variable to true. The pop-up will display so that users are able to know why the request is not passing. So let me go back on my upvote button, go into the on error workflow, then add an action, and it's a simple change variable value, and the display 3 vote max toast, we want it to be true. Now, if I do this, I try to vote on the fourth person. See, it's triggering. So now I know that I have to downvote someone. Then I can upvote for someone else. I see it's working.
Sham is asking if the pop-up subscribe for any change in the variable. Um, I'm not sure what you mean.
When you meet subscribe, yeah, it's like it's watching the changes. Actually, it's not watching the changes here. It's more that it's a concept that you have in JavaScript frameworks, like current frameworks. That's why React is called
Yeah.
React, is because the elements on the front end, they will react to any change. They are watching everything. So you could say subscribe, yeah. But you don't have to
I
declare
got it
it.
now.
That's the why these frameworks are really powerful, because like 10 years ago on the web, you would like check if a variable change every time and then do something. No, it's the opposite. Like your elements, they will react to these changes. Oh, you still hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
I can. You're
Because
frozen, but
my
I can.
unable
Why
to
I can.
access the camera. Why? Okay, let me check. I think I've got an
While
issue
you
with my
check, I'll
camera.
just mention something because so right now what you showed is like having a dedicated variable, like a dedicated Boolean variable that's true or false, and will display a toast. Another practice that we recommend when you have a lot of toasts that you of different toasts that you will want to display depending on the error message and things like that. Some instead of having one Boolean variable for each, one practice that you can put in place is having one object variable. And in the object variable, you would have, for example, the one key could be the name of the toast. In and the Boolean would be, true or false. But then the name of the toast that you want to trigger, you can update in a workflow. So I'm not sure I'm being very clear, but it helps you instead of having multiple Boolean variables to display a toast or not. You can have one variable that you
Yeah,
change depending on your workflow to display the correct message or
that's something we'll showcase in the CRM next week, because we are using kind of this process, is that we have got an element, it's an alert, and you just have to change properties using a workflow. Basically, we created a global workflow that will change an object, and in this object, you will have all the properties to customize the alert. So like the title, the subtitle, the type, if it's an error, success, meaning you only have one alert across your whole website. It's a reusable component, one variable and one workflow, and you always execute the workflow, so that you're able, like, you don't have like multiple variables. You know that you will be able to trigger this alert everywhere using the same API. And
yeah,
yeah,
and
Hisham, it's
that's
kind
kind
of
of a
like observables, yeah, but like it's called props basically in Vue or React, because every data that you will use in the current state of your app, it's being, yeah, like watched by the framework. So every time you change the value, the framework will know that you have to change some components linked to them.
And just to go back to that idea of having one variable, one object that can change the alerts or the pop-ups or modals, whatever, um, that's something we're preparing a course that will explain some of the web development best practices, and that's one of them. Because when you have that, the code is more maintainable. You're not repeating yourself as much, and also there's less information in your browser, so it's faster. So those are some things we're going to try to get better at in terms of communicating them and helping you build more scalable, faster and more scalable web apps.
Exactly. So now I only have one thing to finish, is that I want the people I voted for already to be in another color, so like this purple, you know. So we'll use the same system I use in the workflow, checking if the user, like the head of growth ID, is already in my current list of votes. then if it's the case, we'll display a purple color, otherwise a white color. So to do this, we can begin with the number. So for example, in the text color, we'll bind it. And some people, they ask what the result of a formula should be when you bind to a CSS property here. And basically, it's the CSS line. So if it's text color, for example, it will be like the string with the hexadecimal value of the color. For the border that we'll use later, it will be like 2px solid, the color. So, you know, like it's exactly what you would type as the CSS value. So to do this, then I have to use my formula from before. So let me check it already. You know what? I will redo it with you. It will be better. So filter by key. I want to check in if the votes in the key head of growth ID, I've got the value of my current item. Yeah. Then I want to check its length. And put everything in a if. So if it's inside, I want purple. Otherwise, I want white. So white is FFF. So purple exists in CSS, but it's ugly. So I will use like the purple from the project. But I don't remember the hexadecimal. So what I will do is that I will check on this border, basically. Okay, it's this. So now if I go back to my formula. Okay, so you see here, it's purple when I voted for this person, otherwise it's white. And now I have only to do the same thing for all the elements inside this. So for example, the icon, the color, it's exactly the same.
Maybe
So
you
it
could use a
works.
reusable function, or no, because you wouldn't have the
Yeah,
ID.
I need the ID. Yeah. But we're thinking about this, and it's already in the roadmap. But for complex formula like this that we want to reuse, what we'll do is that you'll have formula, JavaScript, and advanced formula. And advanced formula basically will be small workflows with branching, with less actions, because you can't do API calls, for example, here. But meaning that you will be able to do if else, you know, have multiple steps and create variables like internal variables to do this. So you'll be able to, have a workflow for this. And then for the border, so the border is here. And for the border, it's 2px solid, the color, 2px solid, the other color. You see it's working. And as you said, Isham, this is also reactive. So you'll see every time we vote, it will be changed in real time. So if I don't vote for Denitsa, it's white, no. If I vote for Martin, it's purple instantly, you see, because the collection were updated, so the formula gets computed again, and WeWeb knows that it has changed. So yeah, that's it.
How was the ceremony?
It was cool. There were like I had to pitch WeWeb before 300 people in a big room, but it was cool. Also, like drinking and eating for free. I mean, I love it. As a French, you know, we love eating and drinking. And yeah, it was cool meeting with people, and basically speaking to product growth team, marketing teams that have needs now to use apps that like WeWeb, Supabase, Xano, like all these kind of no-code/low-code tools, because their projects are getting more complex and linked to the product. So they can't use only Bubble or Webflow. They need to do real web apps and also linked to their own data. So that was really interesting to see marketing people asking for this.
Nice. I think we can probably leave it at that today, unless Hisham, if you
Yep.
have questions, or anyone else, if you have questions, don't hesitate. Just so you know, so on next week we will send out a change log, but just so you know, some of the new features, we finally released the rich text input. So you can add that to your projects. Just so you know, the way to add and remove links is not completely intuitive. So you actually have to highlight the text, and then you can add a link on it, basically. Um, and so, among the other things, we now have self-hosting and project export. This is an enterprise feature. We can't make it available to everyone for now, but if you're interested, if it's a requirement for your projects, we'll have the documentation on how you can do it, and you can reach out to us for like commercial conditions. But yeah, it's a big deal for us because we think it's kind of like it really places WeWeb in the kind of like the future of visual programming, where you can code kind of no code real projects, and yeah, use them as code afterwards. We added a compare function to compare complex arrays and objects. You can now call a workflow from a JS action, which is pretty cool. We also added a bunch of in the browser property bindings. We added the query, the base URL, and the domain name. So that's pretty cool as well. And oh yeah, and also you can now crop and resize images when you upload them, but also if you've already uploaded them and you need to edit them. So yeah, that was quite a big release. The huge thing was self-hosting and also the rich text input. But yeah, we'll have user documentation for you next week in the changelog, so you can look into those. And just so you know, next week on Friday, we will be at the No Code Summit, it's a no code event hosted in Paris, France. So we're gonna try to stream live from there. It might be very noisy, and we probably we'll do a very short stream to kind of say hi and show you around. There will be people from Bubble, Softer, NC Scale, us obviously, so Glide as well. So it's a huge no code event in France. So we'll try to show you a little bit a sneak peek into how it looks. And yeah, I think the week after that we'll be back on track. And um, one of the things I'd like to do, I don't know if it will be ready for the week after, but showing the project that one of our developers built, like the Stream Plus. I think maybe you saw it go through on Twitter, but it's a nice project that one of our developers built with the movie database API. So yeah, that's kind of what'll be going on in the next few weeks. Can you think of anything else, Q?
No, I think you
That
told
covers it.
everything. So yeah, yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Um, cool. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for showing up. We'll be back next week. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, of course, don't hesitate to go to community.weweb.io or on Twitter. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us anytime. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Have a great weekend.